3 seasons into the Talent Exodus Challenge, and we don't seem much closer to meeting our objectives than we were at the start. We've qualified for Europe twice in a row, which does get us closer to the 5 in a row goal, but we don't look like threatening for the Premier League or Champions League titles anytime soon, with a 6th place finish in the league, meaning we don't even get to play in the Champions League next season, having to settle for the Europa League, which we probably have a good chance of winning, but it doesn't do us any good. It's not one of the objectives. And to make matters worse, we're going to have to do it without our 3-star men from last season, Simone Profundi, who delivered 39 goal contributions in his first season in the Premier League, Ruben Neves, who added 21 of his own from defensive midfield, and 17-goal centre-back and second top scorer, Sebastian Coates. We'll only have 75% of the money we raised by selling them to rebuild the team, and Coates has already agreed to leave on a free transfer. This summer might be a challenging one. Ruben Neves was first out of the door after Coates agreeing a £65 million move to Barcelona almost as soon as the season ended. We'll miss his crucial goals and leadership for sure, but we always knew we were unlikely to have him long term, and getting such a big fee so early in the summer is a huge advantage because it sets our maximum incoming transfer at a pretty generous £48.75 million and gives me more time to come up with a plan to replace him. Profundi was a little trickier to shift despite his incredible season, mainly because we valued him too high, and I think if we hadn't been trying to push him out the door, we'd have eventually received the 75 million plus offers I think he warranted. But we don't have the luxury of waiting in this challenge, so he ended up joining Dortmund for just £34.5 million. Still a massive profit on the £10 million we paid for him 18 months ago, but we absolutely should have gotten more. We moved on a few fringe players as well, and ended up with total player sales of 139 million, which with our 75% reinvestment rule means we could spend a maximum of £104 million over the summer, well below the 244 million the club gave me, thanks to the ever-increasing bank balance we'd already generated. After the success of Profundi, we decided to go young with our replacements. 20-year-old Arsenal youngster Miles Lewis-Skelly, who in this universe is a defensive midfield wonderkid, England under-21 international who played 10 games for Arsenal last season, came in to replace Neves for 37.5 million, with 23-year-old centre-back Christian Mosquera arriving for 11.5 million to replace Coates. I also couldn't resist Pau Kubasi for £9.75 million from Paris Saint-Germain, even though we didn't really need him. But that's a bargain price for a player I've used before in other saves. And then 23-year-old Austrian international attacking midfielder Dijon Cameri came in for 18 million to replace Profundi. Juanlu came in to replace the departing Valentin Barco, and 20-year-old Argentinian wonderkid Franco Mastantuono joined from River Plate for £6.75 million, because you don't turn down a 20-year-old Argentinian wonderkid from River Plate for less than £10 million. Despite our exploits over the last few seasons, the media didn't think we'd moved on very far from the team that started, with them still predicting a 9th place finish for us, but we had other ideas. We started well, beating Spurs in the Community Shield at Wembley for another piece of silverware, before starting our Premier League season with defeats to Leeds, Leicester and Aston Villa, and a completely out of character 6-0 win over bogey team West Ham. It's going to take us a while to get used to playing without Neves, Profundi and Coates, who were our key boys last year and contributed nearly 100 goals between them, but the West Ham result convinced me there's a good 11 hidden somewhere in this squad. I just need to find it. Which proved to be pretty difficult with such a young squad, because they have no concept of the idea of consistency. We scored some good results, beating Chelsea 3-1, raiding champion Spurs 4-0, Liverpool 1-0, but mixed those results in with defeats against the likes of Southampton and Everton. And by the halfway point of the season, we were languishing down in 7th place again, 16 points outside the top 3 and 23 points behind the Tottenham team we've beaten 3 times in a row in the FA Cup final, the Community Shield and that big league win. We're a lot better than that league table suggests we are, and we were showing it in Europe, because just like last season in the Champions League, we raced to the top of the Europa League table and were the first to qualify for the knockout rounds, winning all 8 of our matches, including an impressive away win against Juventus. We're going to be fully focused on the Europa League in the second half of the season, because with Champions League qualification through the league looking unlikely, our only way in might be to win the Europa League. There was very little needed in the way of transfers during January, and with only backup keeper Jordi Petrovic Petrovic leaving, we didn't really have any money to spend either, aside from a little left over from the summer. We replaced Petrovic with Man City youngster Spike Brits and spent the rest of our money on Saulo, an 18-year-old Brazilian wonderkid midfielder who already had a full cap for Brazil for £14 million from Atletico Mineiro. Our Premier League form flipped into something a little bit more like what you'd expect in the second half of the season, and we started beating the teams we were supposed to beat, but losing to the big teams. Although even that didn't happen very often, losing just 2 Premier League games against Chelsea and Liverpool for the rest of the season, and getting knocked out of the FA Cup in the quarter-final by Man City. We ended the season on a 7-match unbeaten run that included 3 straight wins, but it was only enough for us to get up to 6th place, outside of the much-needed Champions League places, but we were still in the Europa League. The round of 16 gave us the toughest draw in the competition, facing a Juventus team we'd narrowly beaten in the league stage. Things were a little bit more comfortable this time around, with a 3-0 aggregate victory setting us up for a quarter-final with Villarreal. We took a 2-0 lead away from home in the first leg thanks to an own goal and Ollie Watkins, but Villarreal got one back in the second half to leave us defending a 1-goal lead at home in the second leg. Mitoma scored early on to calm us down a bit before second-half goals from Enciso and Kadioglu secured our spot in the semi-final, where we faced Shakhtar. A very nervy 0-0 away draw in the first leg wasn't ideal, but we opened the scoring after 3 minutes in the second leg through Sildilia, channeling his inner Sebastian Coates, and then goals from Enciso, Watkins and Mitoma wrapped things up, and we were off to Gelsenkirchen for the Europa League final against Atalanta, who are basically the Italian version of us, having finished in 6th place in Serie A. We took the lead in the 17th minute through Mitoma, who'd quietly stepped into the Ruben Neves role of scoring important goals in big games for us. Luis Skelly added the second shortly after, and then forced a third shortly after that with a carbon copy of a Ruben Neves trademark goal that got recorded as an own goal somehow. The job was already done, but we added a couple more in the second half to run out 5-0 winners, pick up another piece of silverware, and most importantly, qualify for next year's Champions League. And that is now 3 European qualifications in a row against our objective of 5 in a row. One other big positive change from last season is the amount of players who averaged over a 7. Last summer, we had to sell the only 3 players we had at that level. This time around, we can let the top 3 go and still field an 11 who averaged over a 7.0 this season. The standout player was Julio Enciso, who stepped into the Profundi void, averaging a 7.27 and getting 32 goal contributions over 42 games. And this is where we'll be really testing the conveyor belt of young talent we're trying to build, because theoretically, we already have ready-made replacements for him at the club in the likes of Kameri and Mastantuono. The other 2 who'll need to move on are Junior Krupi, who is in his 2nd season at the club and averaged a 7.19 with 22 goal contributions, and Simon Adingra, who like Enciso has been here longer than me and did a 7.09 average and 16 goal contributions, but without ever being a consistent starter, so I really don't think I'm going to miss him. At this point, I'd like everybody to stop and give a nice big round of applause to Newcastle United for finally doing what I'd hoped would be happening every summer in this save and giving us a serious chunk of cash for one of our departing players. We got £103 million from them for Enciso, meaning we can go and do some big boy shopping this summer with a maximum incoming transfer fee allowed of £77 million. We also got £50 million out of Man United for Adingra and £60 million from Real Madrid for Krupi. It seems like that Europa League win has done wonders for our reputation, with the fees and calibre of clubs now interested in our players demonstrated again by Manchester City giving us £94 million for Ilya Meslier, who by this stage had already become our backup keeper in my mind, considering we signed Guillaume Restes on a free transfer a week before. A couple of fringe players left on loan, and our total transfer income for this summer ended up at £315 million, meaning we had £236 million available to spend. This is my kind of summer. I decided to fully prioritise Wonderkids this summer and try and sign so many of them that even if we lost 3 of them a year for the next few years, the remaining ones could develop into Champions League and Premier League winning players. A high-risk strategy, but a super fun one. 19-year-old Spanish international striker Jose Vicente Hernandez came in for £27 million from Atletico, along with 20-year-old Dutch international defensive midfielder Johnny Carolina from PSV, 19-year-old Burkinabe international winger Alisson Sane from Club Brugge, 20-year-old Serbian international midfielder Yugoslav Trajkovic for the bargain price of $5.75 million, 19-year-old Chilean international defender Javier Perez for an even cheaper $3.1 million, and 19-year-old Serbian midfielder Igor Grujic for $5.75 million. That's 6 Wonderkids all aged 20 and under, 95 million spent, and that was the Enciso money gone. But the transfer window wasn't even open yet. I had to adjust my strategy a little from here, partly because of the Premier League limit of 6 foreign under 21 players from abroad in a season. We were now after established Champions League quality players. We already know about Restes joining on a free transfer to take over as our starting keeper, and he was joined by Ivan Toney on a free at the end of his Al Ali contract on a surprisingly cheap salary as well. Karim Konate joined from Newcastle for £30 million as another striker option to compete with Toney and last season's 33-goal top scorer Ollie Watkins, and then Bradley Barcola became available from PSG. We were only able to get him as a loan with a guaranteed future fee of 42 million, so I decided to allocate that fee to this summer, even though we wouldn't be paying it until next year, and got him in. We then picked up a couple more experienced players, with Fikayo Tomori joining from Milan for 26 million and Kieran Tierney from Arsenal for 20 million, and with a couple more rotation options joining, our total spend for the summer maxed out at 236 million, exactly what we were allowed to spend. Most excitingly though, and for the first time in this save, I feel like I've improved my team over the summer despite the big money sales. With Restes a big upgrade on Meslier, Tomori and Tierney coming straight in as nailed-on starters in defence, and Toney and Barcola at least as good but certainly more experienced than Enciso and Krupi in attack. The media still think we'll finish 9th, and I'm just accepting at this point that they don't like me. And the board are confused about why I've left £422 million unspent in my transfer budget. But we're back in the Champions League, and fingers crossed, now I have a strong enough team with a deep enough squad to challenge for both that and the Premier League titles. We started the season with 3 straight defeats to Chelsea, Manchester United and Tottenham, although did finally pick up some points defeating Newcastle, who'd basically funded our new squad, and we beat Real Madrid to win the European Super Cup. Team cohesion is a nightmare in a save like this, and with such a high turnover of players, we're almost guaranteed to start slowly every season, but with no pressure on us to even qualify for Europe, the board would still just be happy with a top half finish. It isn't a massive problem, it just makes it harder to hit those trophy objectives. But not impossible, because once we got out of August, we only lost 2 more games before Christmas. Newcastle getting revenge on us for beating them in the league with a 2-1 win in the Champions League, and Southampton taking advantage of a Champions League hangover, beating us 1-0 just a few days after we'd drawn away to Ajax. But as our team cohesion improved, the quality of our squad really started to shine through, and by the time we got into December, we beat Newcastle, Arsenal and Liverpool and drew away to Man City, and found ourselves 3rd in the league, just 5 points behind top of the table Spurs. That early defeat against Newcastle in the Champions League meant we found that a little bit harder going than we had the first time around, but victories over Feyenoord, Benfica, Celtic and Anderlecht meant we were still looking good for a top 8 finish with 2 games to play. The most notable transfer in January was Ollie Watkins joining Leeds for £25 million. Now 33, he was in his 4th season at the club and had finished top scorer twice, including last season, but he hadn't started a game this season, falling behind Toney, Konate and Barcola in the pecking order, so it was a pretty easy decision to let him go. We also sold a couple of fringe players in Nino and Niakate and loaned out a few more, and ended up bringing in a total of £77.5 million, meaning we had £58 million to spend. We didn't really need anyone and still couldn't bring in foreign under 21 players because we hit the season limit back in the summer, so we forced a couple more players into the squad, with 20-year-old English wonderkid Tommy Barker joining from Manchester United for £4.2 million, Dutch centre-back Wouter Gos coming in for £37.5 million, and Brazilian defender Murillo joining for £10.5 million from Inter Miami, a total spend of £52 million. And we kept on winning. We went undefeated in all competitions in January, with our biggest wins coming away at Chelsea in the league and away at Inter in the Champions League. We ended up finishing 3rd in the Champions League, so once again skipped around to help fixture congestion, and as the transfer window closed, we were 2nd in the Premier League, just 1 point behind Manchester United, and we're genuinely in with a chance of completing the entire challenge this season, which of course made us start to panic and bottle it. We lost our next league game away at Villa, and then lost the EFL Cup final to Arsenal for the 2nd time in 3 years, before also losing to West Ham in the league. We drew Atletico in the Champions League round of 16 and won the first leg 3-2 thanks to a Karim Konate hat-trick, fully justifying the decision to sell Ollie Watkins. We had a bit of a scare in the second leg, going 2-0 down before half-time, leaving us 4-3 behind with 20 minutes to go, but up stepped Dijon Camry with a 5-minute brace to secure our spot in the next round. We then smashed Spurs again, 4-0 this time in the FA Cup quarter-final, but then got even even more wobbly in the Premier League, drawing with Leeds, losing to Southampton and narrowly beating Brentford. It was clear that these cup runs were distracting our young squad. Our Champions League quarter-final opponents were Newcastle, the only team to beat us in the competition so far this season, and of course, the new home of last season's star man Enciso, who despite Newcastle spending £103 million on, started the first leg on the bench. Newcastle took the lead on the hour through Alexander Isak, before we set ourselves up nicely for the second leg through an 89th minute penalty from Andre. Enciso didn't even make the bench for the second leg. Newcastle have just clearly completely lost their minds. And Matoma stepped up again in his official capacity as scorer of vital goals, netting one in the 36th minute and then another towards the end of the game for a 2-0 win on the night, 3-1 on aggregate. Whilst we patiently waited for the Champions League semi-final, the rest of the footballing world continued, and we had an FA Cup semi versus Man City, which we won 2-1 to book another final at Wembley, but we then lost to City in the league and then lost again to Arsenal. Those matches coming either side of the Champions League semi-final against Barcelona. We lost against a Barcelona team that didn't include Ruben Neves. Losing our star players hurts even more when they don't even play at the team that they leave us to go to. It stings. This left us with a lot to do in the second leg against a very good Barcelona team, which is when Stanis Idombo Mazambo asked me to hold his beer. He was now in his 4th season at the club following his £25 million move from Sevilla, and he'd found it tough going, playing only 9 games in his first season and 2 in his second before he was loaned out to Real Sociedad for the second half of the season, where he played 18 times but didn't exactly set La Liga alight. Last season was a bit of a copy and paste for him, playing 3 games for us, then joining Valencia on loan in January and not doing very much there again. And even this season, he'd been a very long way away from being a regular starter. But he started in the second leg against Barcelona, opening the scoring on 8 minutes and then scoring 2 worldy free kicks, one in the 37th minute and one in the 66th, to complete the most unlikely hat-trick ever and secure us a spot in the Champions League final against Real Madrid. We celebrated by winning our final 2 league games of the season to secure a 4th place finish and Champions League football again for next year. 4 years in a row now. We're nearly there on that objective. And arguably more importantly, we finished only 7 points behind champions Arsenal. We did also lose the FA Cup final to Arsenal. Again, that's the 3rd time in 3 years we've lost a Wembley final against Arsenal. But it was now time for the Champions League final in Amsterdam. Mazambo, starting only his 24th game for us in 4 seasons, but fresh off his semi-final heroics, scored again. Camry then doubled our lead in the 9th minute before 2 guys who think they're fancy, called Bellingham and Vinicius Jr., combined to get one back from Madrid just a minute later. They then had a 19th minute equaliser disallowed for offside, and then the game broke down to something closer to a wrestling match than a football match. Ferdi Kadioglu started things off, picking up a yellow card for snapping Pedro Porro in half, which clearly upset Madrid because they retaliated with a crunching tackle from Frederic Osnes to get him sent off, leaving us with less than half the match left to play, defending a 1-goal lead with a 1-man advantage, which lasted 2 minutes, before Kadioglu pretty much did the same again, this time mugging Vinicius Jr. for his 2nd yellow card and leading to a very scrappy second half. But when you're Brighton playing against Real Madrid, scrappy probably goes in your favour. And with Madrid chasing the game, we finished them off with a counter-attack for our 3rd goal through top scorer Ivan Toney. And at 3-1, we'd won the Champions League. That leaves us with only one objective left to complete: winning the Premier League. But once again, we're going to have to do it without our best players from this season. And I've got myself into a right pickle on that front with Barcola. We signed him on loan, and obviously he went on to become one of our best players with a rating of 7.19 and 36 goal contributions. But he doesn't officially sign for us until this summer. So we're not going to be able to sell him because Football Manager won't let you sell someone who's only just signed. My solution is that he'll have to be loaned out and sold as soon as it's possible to sell him, and his punishment for getting myself into this mess, I'll have to sell my 4th best player this summer too. So the other 3 leaving along with Barcola are Stanis Idombo Mazambo, who averaged a 7.28 from 32 games and single-handedly won us the Champions League, but we never really valued properly, so I don't think we'll miss him that much. Karim Konate, who's a much bigger loss, because in my head he was taking over as starting striker from Toney next season, but with a 7.12 from 37 games and 19 goals, he has to go, and they'll be joined by the man who almost cost us the Champions League, Ferdi Kadioglu, who averaged 7.11 from 51 games and is the guy being sold in lieu of Barcola. And regardless of what happens, Barcola has to be sold next summer along with next season's best 3 players. and I'm not going to mess around signing players on loan anymore. I have learnt my lesson. So all of that means we're losing 3 of our top 4 scorers, with Mazambo, Barcola and Kanate getting 79 goal contributions between them, and with Ivan Toney now 33 years old, that's a lot of pressure on him and whoever we bring in to replace the other 3. And that's where we'll pick things up in the next video. Make sure if you've enjoyed this one, you leave a nice big thumbs up on it for me, subscribe to the channel for daily Football Manager videos. Thank you very much for watching.